They always told us it was a serpent who tempted Adam and Eve, but it may not have been a snake at all. You may have heard a simple version of this story as a kid, but now you're ready for the adult version. Genesis 3. Our ancestors Adam and Eve were living in Eden, a place where the physical world intersected with the spiritual world. And for a brief time, spiritual beings and humans lived together on the same plane of existence. And then this talking snake shows up to ruin everything. Tell me you've never wondered why there's a talking snake in this story. This isn't an episode of The Muppets.
Does anyone speak English around here?
This was highly sophisticated writing. It has layers like an onion, and unfortunately, most people only ever see the top layer. So the first layer to peel back reveals this was no animal. It was something else. I got my hands on a book called Unseen Realm by Dr. Michael Heiser, and something I saw in it unlocked something profound. The Hebrew word for serpent is Nachash, and it's true that this word is usually translated today as serpent, but it's way more complicated than that. But you're smart though, right? Remember that game Wheel of Fortune where you had to guess the missing letters of a word? Well, we're gonna play a different version. Not that version, but how about Wheel of Serpents? Originally, the Hebrew language had no vowels. So originally the word serpent just looked something like this. Someone added the vowels much later in history. And in this game, there's more than one way to fill in these blanks. Modern translators added 2 A's here and came up with Nachash, meaning serpent. But there is another way to fill these blanks in. Give me an O and an E. This word then becomes Nachash, a word that means diviner, as in divination. Communication with someone from the spiritual realm. Bingo. There's even another word related to Nachash that means bronze or copper, basically describing something shiny. It's Nehosheth. I've got it! The serpent was Abraham Lincoln, you bearded fiend. That's definitely incorrect. But later in the Bible, Daniel would describe an angel this way. In Daniel 10:6, he says, his arms and legs like the gleam of burnished bronze. The bronze imagery here was used in the ancient world to describe the shining appearance of supernatural beings. So 2 interpretations are now on the table. It's a literal snake, or it's actually an angel or supernatural being. The trouble is, the story seems to have clearly described a snake though, at least on the surface. Verse 1 calls him a beast of the field, more crafty than the other animals. Wait a minute. Since when are animals crafty? I'm glad you asked. The very verse that describes the serpent as an animal also gives him the characteristics of a human or angel. Isn't that a little strange? It seems like it has to be a clue, but to what? It was time to consult some experts, so I gathered every scholarly book I had on Genesis and then some. And then I saw the link I had been looking for. Ariel's Bible commentary contained this clue. Ancient Near Eastern divination practices often included the use of a serpent. Basically, it means when people tried to tell the future, they did it using snakes. How exactly would that work? You got me. I don't think I'm gonna try it to find out. But check this out. Unseen Realm says the serpent was an image commonly used to reference a divine throne guardian. Dude, Unseen Realm confirms something I once heard scholar Tim Mackey say. The book says sometimes writers, when they use a term, want their readers to think about all possible meanings and nuances. So this tells us there could be a dual or even a triple meaning here. What's interesting is serpents are described in the Bible as throne guardians too. In Isaiah chapter 6, Isaiah had a vision of God's throne room, and he described these weird creatures. They're called seraphim. They're fiery serpents near the throne of God. So let's say it was actually a throne room guardian. To me, this actually changes the story quite a bit because, from Eve's perspective, you would think you would be able to trust the guardian of God's throne. But this is a story about betrayal. Do we even know why he did this? Well, some say the serpent just wanted to be worshipped, but that's not what he wanted in Eden. The clues are all right there in the story, begging to be seen. In the story, God told Adam and Eve that if they ate fruit from the tree of knowledge, they would die. So the serpent strolls in, and what does he tell them to do? He says God lied, and they should eat the fruit because they'll gain knowledge and raise their status. He seems to be aware that if the humans eat from the tree of knowledge, they will die. What's he really trying to do? He wanted to kill humans. Bingo! He could be an angel that was ticked off when God introduced humans, the newest member of his family. The serpent maybe thought it was better before humans were around. It's almost like he's our jealous older brother. I don't know that everybody realizes the significance of what happened here. When we get deeper into the Bible, God is upset that people keep dabbling in other religions, right? And it seems like just a jealousy thing at first. But I think God might actually be thinking, did you guys forget that some of these beings that you're worshiping were trying to kill you? Okay, so we've now established a link between snakes and supernatural beings. But I don't get it. If he was an angel, why not just say that? Why say he was a beast of the field? This was a strategic decision by the writer of Genesis 3. And if you've made it this far, then you are ready for the deepest layer yet, one that most people never get to. Some have wondered if the description of the serpent coming from the field hints that maybe he came from outside of the Garden of Eden. This verse that seems literal may actually have a symbolic meaning. And that's going to continue in Genesis 3:14. God cursed the serpent for crimes against humans, and here he said, "On your belly you shall go, and dust you shall eat all the days of your life." Some think this passage explains that serpents once had legs, but lost them after tempting Adam and Eve. But the text never directly says anything about a serpent ever having legs. There's another possible meaning here. Get a load of this. According to the IVP Bible Backgrounds commentary on the Old Testament, the Egyptian pyramid text contains spells or curses that would keep a serpent on its belly. But why? Think about it. What do serpents do before they attack? They sit up, they rear and raise their head. But if their face is on the ground, they're not really in the position to deliver a killing strike. And another clue. In both the Epic of Gilgamesh and the Descent of Ishtar, other stories that were floating around in the area at the time, the underworld is described as a place for the dead where they eat dust as their food. Sound familiar? Before I revealed the coolest evidence of all, I put all of these facts on one sheet that you can download. Check the video description to get it. Serpents were common in other religions in the region too. So using a serpent in the story would have triggered certain ideas in a reader's mind, no matter what culture you were from. If you were writing a story to a lot of different people from a lot of different nations and cultures, well, then using a common figure like a serpent is a really smart move. The deepest clues I could find come from Word Biblical Commentary on Genesis. It says, in Canaanite religion, serpents were associated with good things like fertility, but they were also a symbol of chaos. For instance, Leviathan was a giant sea serpent that served as a metaphor for chaos in the sea. And it brought to mind danger and death. Not that different from the Eden story, right? It could be that the writer used serpent imagery to tell the reader that this being tempting Eve was a rival god who brought chaos and death. But the Gilgamesh epic holds the most fascinating clue of all. Word Biblical Commentary says, Gilgamesh found a plant through which he could avoid death. Unfortunately, while he was swimming in a pond, something came out and swallowed the plant, stealing his immortality. Guess what it was? A serpent. It's time to put all these pieces together. For years, it's been assumed that the serpent was a literal talking snake. Later rabbis thought this way. In Jewish tradition, the rabbis had a story about a demon named Samael, the Lord of Snakes. He rode on the back of, no surprise, a serpent, and somehow controlled it with his spirit. Modern Christianity teaches that the snake was Satan, or that he somehow used the snake like a puppet to trick Adam and Eve into losing their immortality. And I'm open to that interpretation, but today I'm entertaining another idea. I'm wondering if the serpent was ever really a serpent at all. What if the serpent was actually a disgruntled spirit or angel, just described as a snake to make a point? We know that this story existed for hundreds of years before it was written down in oral form. Maybe when someone finally wrote it down, he looked around at all the people he was writing to, a mix of Jews, Egyptians, Canaanites, and more, and he thought, you know, if I describe this angel, this evil angel, as a serpent, then everybody on the continent is going to understand what I'm saying. That the serpent was actually a high-ranking angel or spirit who had access to God's throne room, and he hated humanity so much that he tricked them and stole their immortality. Using a snake in this story could have been a communication strategy that we don't recognize today because, well, it's not from our time period. Maybe this doesn't really change the gist of the story, but it does help us with something like this. The next time someone says, talking snakes? That sounds like mythology. You can ask, is it though? Or was the writer just using mythology to communicate something true? There are plenty more layers of the Bible to peel back, so watch this video next.